All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who have experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson, and just very excited and honored actually this morning to introduce my guest, Dr. Richard Schwartz. Richard, are you ready to go?
I am ready, Guy.
All right. Dr. Schwartz began his career as a systemic family therapist and an academic at the University of Illinois and at Northwestern University. Grounded in systems thinking, Dr. Schwartz developed the internal family systems model, otherwise known as IFS, in response to clients' descriptions of various parts within themselves. In 2000, he founded the Center for Self-Leadership, which offers 3 levels of trainings and workshops in IFS for professionals and the general public, both in this country and abroad. A featured speaker for national professional organizations, Dr. Schwartz has published 5 books and over 50 articles about IFS. All right, Richard, obviously that's just you in a nutshell, but step back a moment. Tell our listeners where you're calling from, and let's dive in.
Yeah, I'm at home in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is really adjacent to Boston. So I'm in the Boston area. And what was your other question?
Well, just that was pretty much it. Are you originally from there?
No, I moved here about 3 years ago. I was most of my life spent in the Chicago area.
Okay. All right, nice. So let's start out here. We talked a little bit, before we started recording about a quote or mantra, something that kind of sets the stage, gives our listeners a context and an idea about yourself. What would you like to share with us today?
I like the phrase, all parts are welcome, that encapsulates some of my approach. So that would be it.
Okay. And give us an idea of why that quote, and I guess it might be an opportunity to give a little background about, quote unquote, your approach. But when did that quote, all parts are welcome, become resonant for you?
Yeah, well, I'm trained as a family therapist, so I was steeped in systems thinking. And then I began working with a population of bulimic kids in the early 1980s, actually, quite a long time ago. I'm an old man. And I started to get curious about why family therapy wasn't working for these kids. And they started to talk about these different parts of them. That's the word they used, and would talk about how one part would tear into them and call them names, and another that would bring up another part that would feel bereft and empty and alone and scared. And that was so dreadful that to the rescue almost would come a binging part that would take them out and make them feel better temporarily. But the critic would come back and attack them for the binge. And so as I listened to that, it sounded almost like a family therapy session where you had these escalating sequences of people interacting with each other that would make for symptoms. And so I became curious, could I apply some systems thinking to this inner world of what they were calling parts? And I was assuming at the time, what most of the field has assumed, that they were what they seemed. So the critic was an introject of parental criticism, critical energy, and the binge was an out-of-control impulse. And so I was having my clients fight with them and try to control them, which only made it worse. But with that conception of what they were, I didn't have an alternative. And then I had a client who cut herself, and I hated that was happening on my watch. And so I decided I wasn't going to let that cutting part keep doing that to her. And after battling with it for a couple hours, it agreed not to cut her. And I opened the door of the next session, and then she had a big gash on the side of her face. And I just collapsed at that point, and I just said, I can't beat you with this. And that was a turning point in the history of this work, because she said spontaneously, "I don't want to beat you." And I shifted out of that coercive place to just being curious. That why do you cut her? And the part talked a lot about how when she was being abused as a child, it needed to get her out of her body and it needed to contain the rage that would get her more abuse. And so I shifted again and was able to give it a lot of appreciation for trying to save her life back then. And the part burst into tears and talked about how everybody hated it and tried to get rid of it. And that it was really just trying to protect these other very vulnerable parts of her still. And it still had to deal with the rage. And so there were reasons it still was doing this to her. And by a turning point, I mean, from that point on, I never got into a power struggle with a part because I learned that they're all trying their best and they're stuck in the past in trauma scenes often, and are forced into these roles that they don't even like and think that they desperately need to keep doing, and are also carrying what we call burdens, so extreme beliefs and emotions that came into the person's system from the trauma, and it almost attached to these parts like a virus and drive how they operate inside. And so as I got all that, there was a total shift in the way I approached these parts and then helped other people approach them. So that's what I mean by all parts are welcome. We work with parts of people that have perpetrated and done really bad things to kids. And I've worked with inmates with this work. And even those parts that you think are just evil, when approached from a curious place, and ultimately leads to having compassion for them and how they had to protect when the person was being abused.
This is really fascinating. I mean, the story of how this came about is almost as fascinating as the work itself. Richard, when you talked about how this work began, what stage were you at in your career, so to speak, as a therapist?
I was a punk. I was maybe 32 when I ran into the phenomena, and I had just been hired at an institute for juvenile research. It was called, part of a family therapy training program. And I had maybe 3 years of clinical experience with pretty severe populations. We were working with gangbangers from the west side of Chicago at that time. And then I also got interested in eating disorders. So this was very early in my career, which I think was lucky because I wasn't totally attached to the frameworks that I'd been using.
I think one of the things that struck me, and I'm wondering, I think it may have struck our listeners as well, is that the way you described the evolution of this process, you seem to be doing these kind of marvelous things. I mean, the way you approach things with curiosity. You said you were working with kids who were having, or who had bulimia. Was there the association? Were you thinking, okay, this can be used or with trauma, quote unquote, as well at that point?
No. And as a family therapist, we were trained. I was what's called a structural family therapist. So we were taught that you don't really have to worry about the past. You can just reorganize these family relationships in the present, and that will take care of the symptoms. But as I was getting to know these parts, they were constantly wanting to talk about what happened to them in the past that forced them into these roles. So I was kind of pulled, kicking and screaming into the past and into trauma scenes by and large. And so, and then I came to recognize that most of the time these parts really wanted to be witnessed for what they went through. And that people in general tend to try to forget all that. When you get hurt badly, you don't want to spend time with the memories, sensations, emotions, beliefs that you got from that time. You want to kind of wall them off inside and what I call exile them. But in doing that, you're not just exiling the memories, sensations, emotions, and beliefs. You're locking away the parts of you that were most hurt by those experiences that are still frozen back there. And so most of us, especially people with a lot of trauma, are cut off from vast resources, because my belief is all these parts are valuable, but they get these burdens, and then we don't want to be around them. And then we're cut off from all those resources. Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and it brings up that image of you kind of warring or fighting with that one part of the woman who was, cutting herself, and then that kind of reconciliation later on, the next session, whatever, when she comes in and that gash on her face, and it's like, I don't want to fight with you anymore. That just, as you described it, that just seems such a turning point and such a revelation therapeutically. How did you get there as a therapist? How did you develop that kind of curiosity?
Well, I think if there's one thing I'm proudest of, it is that I went outside the paradigm and I really just followed the data. William James had a phrase he called radical empiricism. So I consider myself a radical empiricist. Most of this journey has been taking me to places that I didn't believe in at all when I started out. But because clients were teaching me this, I really said, okay, to all my skeptical parts, let's just wait and see. And so now I'm miles and miles away from the set of beliefs that I had when I started out. And it's it's a tough sell in our culture too, because even the idea of having what I call parts, which are real sub-personalities, has been so pathologized that everybody's afraid.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? I'm Sybil or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Let's kind of shift gears here and talk about how you got here in the first place. What got you into this field?
Oh, that's a bit of a long story. My father was head of medicine at a big medical center in Chicago and got me a job on the psych unit on that medical center during the summers when I was in college. And I would watch, it was an adolescent unit, so I'd get close. These kids weren't that different in age from me, so I would get close to some of the kids. And I really liked them, and they would tell me about their therapy sessions. It was a very analytic place, psychoanalytic, and they would talk about how if they didn't say anything, the therapist wouldn't say anything the whole session. It sounded absurd to me. And then on weekends, I would be there with the kids. That's when I worked. And I would see how their families were tearing into them. How could you do this to us, and so on. And and then in the therapy sessions, none of that was being addressed. So from all of that, I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so when I graduated, I heard about community psychology, so I tried that for a while, but I'm sort of too much of an introvert to really do that in a big way. But then through that, I heard about systems thinking and Gregory Bateson, and then followed that down to family therapy. And that's where I found a home initially for a long time. And all I've done is taken a lot of those family therapy systems, principles, and applied them to these inner systems that people have, and found that they work very well that way. I wanted to mention one other aspect of this work that really shocked me. If you think that all parts are valuable is shocking. As I was doing that inner family therapy, and I'm trying to get parts to talk to each other and get along better, and I'm having my client talk to different parts, and I was using open chair stuff back then. Mm-hmm. And I would find, though, that maybe I'm having one of my bulimic kids try to talk to her critic and get along better with it, but she's getting angry constantly at the critic, and it's getting in the way. So I would see is there a part in there that hates the critic who's influencing you to be mean to it? And could you find that part, and could you ask it to step back inside? Which was basically what I'd been doing with families. If there's two people talking to each other and one gets angry, it's often true that a third person is influencing that one to be angry. And if you got that person to step back in the office, the things would go better. So I did that, and people would say, yeah, okay, it stepped back. I'd say, then now how do you feel toward the critic? And it would be something along the lines of, I'm just kind of curious about why it's calling me names. Or even, I feel sorry for it, that it has to do this all the time. Even compassion suddenly. And so then, if I got them there, the conversation with the critic would go very well, and it would reveal what it was protecting, and we could actually heal what it protected, and then everybody could transform. This is a model of transformation. We actually help all these parts out of the roles they're in into their naturally valuable states. And so I would ask now, who is that that's got the curiosity? What part of you is that that's got the compassion? And everybody would say, that's just me, that's myself. So we call that the self with a capital S. And I think the biggest discovery of IFS is that that self can't be damaged and is in everybody. It's kind of our essence. And it can be accessed much more quickly than even meditative traditions have thought, just by asking these protective parts to open space for it.
As you're talking, I'm feeling a wave of kind of healing in this. There's something so allowing about this process. There's something so healing about knowing that we all have these different parts that are kind of operating kind of behind the scenes, and maybe some not behind the scenes, but. And I love that feeling. I was also intrigued, Richard, when you said to yourself, when you first started, you had parts, there was a part of yourself that had to kind of, watch the skeptic in you. That was also interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, as I was working with the bulimic kids, first I thought, oh my God, these kids are a lot sicker than I thought, because they're talking about these altars inside of them. But then I started listening to myself. Oh my God, I've got them too. And some of mine are equally extreme around food. And so then I calmed down and just started thinking, maybe this is the way the mind is. And that people who are diagnosed with, for example, DID, their parts just got blown apart more. But the fact that they have these full personalities isn't any different from all of us. And that's the position I take now.
All right, let's kind of continue on here. I want to ask you about an early clinical error, what you learned from it. But first, let's just take a moment here and pause for these announcements. For only $59 a month, Brighter Vision will get you a website as unique as your practice. Brighter Vision is a worldwide leader in custom therapist website design. The websites are modern, clean, and designed to get more people contacting you. For 1 month free, go to www.brightervision.com/guy. That's www.brightervision.com/guy and use a coupon code GUY. All right, Richard, you kind of alluded to maybe some errors, quote unquote, you made early on when you were developing this theory. But share with our listeners, if I can put you on the spot here, an early clinical error and how that kind of evolved, what you learned from it.
Yeah, so I was mucking around with people's inner systems in this way that I've been describing, and it seemed to me that I should try to get to the pain inside of them as quickly as I could. And in some sessions, I would succeed in doing that, and they would spend the session crying and feel some relief at that. But then I began to notice they were having sort of large bad experiences immediately following the session. I had a client leave my office and get into a car wreck, for example, or another client spiked 103 fever right after a session. I began putting two and two together, and maybe there's something about what I was doing in the session that was related to these backlash experiences. And so I got real curious about that and learned that I was violating the rules of these inner systems by going so quickly to what I'm calling the exiled parts, the parts that carry the pain or the shame or the terror of the traumas. And that, in fact, there are parts that protect them, or protect the client from going there that I needed to get to know and honor and get permission from before going to those exiles. So that led to a kind of map of this inner world that included protective parts and then exiles. And so we've learned the hard way, as I mentioned, to go to exiles first. So even if a client comes in and says, I've got this intense pain or shame inside that I want to work with, I'll say, we'll get to that. But before we do, I want to go to the parts of you that don't want us anywhere near that. And I want to hear all of their reasons for that. And I want to address their fears before we go to these places.
Mm. Can you think of a time, an example of a client you worked with where this might be a good example?
Well, sure. I do it every day. So say a client has a lot of pain that's locked in from a trauma that they're wanting to get to, and I'll say, let me talk to the parts that don't want us to go there. And so the client will focus on a part that, for example, never wants to be vulnerable again because vulnerability got them hurt in the past. And so I'm asking to do something that this part swore many years ago they would never let them do again. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in fact, they hate those vulnerable parts. They want them out of their life. And so I would say, okay, I would say to the part, or I would have the client say to the part, that totally makes sense. I totally understand why you wouldn't want us to go there. And I'm sure bad things have happened in the past when those parts did get out. So you're the boss. We're not going to go anywhere without your permission, which is disarming just by itself to say that. But if you would be willing to let us open that door, we could heal those parts. We're not going there to wallow in the pain. You might feel some of the pain, but you won't be overwhelmed. I'll make sure you're not overwhelmed. And we can actually get them out of where they're stuck in the past, take them to a safe place, and unload all the pain that they carry. And that will free you up as this protective part, because no longer will you have to try and keep all that locked up, spend all your energy keeping this person from being vulnerable. You'll be freed up to do something entirely different that you would much prefer. So that's my pitch to protective parts. Mm-hmm. And it's a very seductive pitch. Very few of them will say, I still don't want to do it, if they trust I can pull this off. So there's an element of coming across in a very confident way that's necessary, and many therapists have been schooled away from having any confidence. So, but I'm saying I can guarantee we can do all these things if you want, but you're the boss. So, and I mean it. If they choose not to do it, we're not going to do it.
Richard, what drives you day to day? You just said you do this every day. You've been doing this for a while. What keeps you going in this field and in the work you're doing day to day?
Oh, there's a number of things. I mean, when I'm doing the work with clients, I feel so privileged because it's like you're in this sacred territory with them and they've allowed you in, and you feel so connected, and it's just a joy to watch how they can heal themselves. So some of it is just the actual work, and then I sort of have got a mission now to actually pump out of therapists what's been pumped into them, all the fear they have. Because one of the things that you find with this work is it's a totally different paradigm for understanding things like dissociation or flashbacks or panic attacks. All the things associated with trauma, resistance, are the activities of protective parts. And when you get that, you don't fear those things. You don't fear even more severe symptoms. As I say, we work a lot with anorexia, with people on the brink of death, suicide all the time. And so we go to the parts that are the suicidal part and listen to its story of why it wants to kill the client and negotiate with it. So if we could get her out of her misery in a different way, would you have to kill her? No, but I don't think you can do that. Would you give us a chance to show you that we can get her out of her misery in a different way? Okay. So it's like that. So it's a very different way of understanding all these things that people have been scared of. And for example, if a client in a normal therapist's office has a panic attack, therapist will stop and try to ground that client and help them breathe and look into my eyes and feel your feet on the floor and try and get them back to a more normal state. But the message to the panic part is you have to leave, you don't belong, which is the opposite of all parts are welcome. So if a client has a panic attack in my office, I'm saying, it's so great you're here. I see you're really scared, but I'm really glad you finally got the courage to come into the office. And it'd be easier to help you if you'd separate from the client a little bit so she can help you too. And the two of us are going to really help you. And the client will suddenly seem grounded because the part's willing to separate, but the message to the part is you're so welcome, not you need to leave.
Wow. This is awesome.
Thank you.
This is awesome. I mean, I'm just, when I first started this podcast, Richard, I was doing a lot of commuting. I was doing my postdoc, my pre-doc, and I would always be stuck in traffic, thinking about my clients, worrying, what the hell I was doing. And I wished that I had the opportunity to just listen to this, what you're saying. It's so inspiring because I love what you're talking about, the fear that therapists have that's been baked into them in a sense.
Yeah.
And, in my experience, a lot of therapists are scared of doing this work. Trauma is like, you do that. Say more about the fear that a lot of therapists have about this process.
Well, in addition to the fear of these scary symptoms that come up with trauma, there's a real fear of this, what I call the overwhelm. So what I call the exiles carry all of this intense pain, shame, terror, and loneliness. And as clients get close to them, they'll start to show a lot of that. And that will scare therapists too, because they've been taught to fear the overwhelm. Even by some trauma therapies that say you have this window of tolerance that you constantly have to monitor and then teach people grounding skills if they get close to the thresholds. I discovered very early into this work with trauma that parts can totally control how much they overwhelm. So if in advance of going to an exile, I have the client ask if it's willing to not overwhelm them as they get close to it, and it agrees to not overwhelm, they never do. And that's never been violated in my 30 years of doing this. So I can very reassuredly say to clients, we can do this and you won't be overwhelmed by all the emotion that's in there. You'll be with it, but you won't be drowning in it. And and just being with it is very healing to this part. And it's the self, not me, who's with it in this inner world. And most of these parts really just want you to witness how bad it was and kind of get how much emotion they had to go through. And also maybe some of the details of the story, maybe not.
Again, I'm reminded of that image of that girl coming into your office with the slash on her face this time. It almost feels to me like, okay, now do you see me? Now do you recognize me?
Exactly right. And that's very insightful, because so often if you do what most of us do with symptoms, which is to try to kill the messenger, the messenger is going to try harder to kill you or to at least get your attention. So we do this a lot with medical symptoms, for example. Our big outcome study was with rheumatoid arthritis, published in the Journal of Rheumatology, where we would have people focus on the pain in their hands and ask it questions as if it were a part. And the answers will come. The typical profile was this part was going to cripple them because it couldn't stand how much their caretaking part, these were Italian South Side here in Boston women who'd never been in therapy before, but had these huge caretaking parts. and that wouldn't let them take care of themselves. And the arthritis was a way to get, to not let them keep doing that, because they wouldn't listen to the parts that didn't like this predicament.
No. Richard, people who are listening to this podcast have varying levels of experience. I really like honing in on the people who are just getting into this field, maybe the people who are kind of burdened with a lot of fear, if you will. What advice would you have for those people, for people who are just beginning their kind of trauma-informed journey, if you will?
Stay curious. Don't believe a lot of what you were taught. Trust that even very severely diagnosed clients have this essence that I'm talking about called the self, that's just beneath the surface of these crazy parts. And find ways to access that. And then also don't fear the activities of the parts, that they're just trying their best. They're trying desperately to keep the client safe, and they're frozen in time. They're stuck. A lot of times I'll just have a client focus on a protector and ask it how old it thinks they are. And most of the time, the answer is in single digits. Mm-hmm. This part thinks they're still 9 years old and still living in that level of vulnerability. And so just updating these parts, just saying, no, I'm not 9 years old anymore. I'm actually, speaking for myself, I'm 66. Mm-hmm. That's a big revelation. And some of the parts just won't believe it. They can't believe that they don't still need to protect you. So anyway, I went on and on more than you asked.
No, that's great. I have it all down here. Again, everything's going to be linked up here at the show notes page at traumatherapistpodcast.com. Richard, in terms of books, I mean, obviously, again, we're going to have your website linked up here with your books and so forth and trainings and so forth. If you could recommend a book to our listeners, something that's maybe inspired you, what would you say?
I think by far the best book on trauma now is Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, which has been out a couple of years now and covers the landscape in a really great way. There's a chapter in it on IFS, but it captures virtually everything that's being done in the trauma field in a very engaging writing style.
So that's The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, Bessel van der Kolk, right? And
yeah.
I definitely remember that you were mentioned, you featured in that book. In terms of trainings, say a little bit about what you've got going on at your website.
Yeah, so we do 3 levels of training all over the country and in Europe and other countries. The level 1 training is either 6 3-day weekends spread 2 months apart, where and they're all very experiential. So we have a 3-to-1 ratio of trainers to students, so that we can keep it very safe and people can actually practice with each other and do a lot of personal healing during the training and get very close to each other. And so there's level 1. There's also a retreat style level 1, which is 2 6-day blocks in nice retreat centers. And then there's a level 2 that I do some of. I don't do any level 1s anymore. And then there's level 3 trainings that I do. So you go to our website, which is selfleadership.org, and you'll get all that information. There's a bookstore that has all my books and stuff. And then I also mentioned we have a conference in Providence, Rhode Island, annual conference coming up in, I believe it's November this year.
Okay.
So people can check on that too.
Is there a link to that on your site?
I don't know if it's up yet, but
okay.
It will be shortly.
Okay. And then I'll be certainly willing to post that up on the show notes page as well.
Yeah, it's November 10th in Providence, Rhode Island.
Okay. Richard, I want to thank you so much. It's been really, really inspiring, and I'm ready to go jump out and get some of your books.
Fantastic,
so,
guy.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
My honor, too, and I really appreciate you asking me.
All right, take care.
Take care.